This is my randomology, and today we're going old school. Forbidden Planet 1956. Last two videos I've done have been a little on the heavy side. There was the Masters of the Universe 2.5, and on Monday's video that was Saint Maud. Both videos I very much enjoyed doing, but kind of heavy, a little depressing, so I wanted to switch it up a little bit. This week we're flipping it around so that it's not going to be Memory Lane Monday, it's going to be Flashback Friday. So this was a movie that I'd seen stills of it when I was in elementary and middle school. Was it in elementary and middle school? I think it was in elementary school. The library at Matias de Llano, where I went, had an encyclopedia of science fiction. Now, this was right when I started really getting into SF. I'd read Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke, and that was the book that really hooked me. And I just devoured absolutely everything I could. And there was this one big tome in the library at school that kept mentioning this movie called Forbidden Planet, and I saw there were some stills from it, and I read a little bit about it, and then I realized that those stills kept popping up whenever something was talking about science fiction. It's almost impossible to not find mention of this movie. Now, this was in the pre-streaming days. This was the Blockbuster era, so if you wanted to watch a movie and it wasn't on TV, you had to go to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video to try to find it, and I never could, because it's an older movie. It's 1956. But Joe Bob Briggs came to the rescue. Back in the late 90s, there was a wonderful, wonderful program on TNT called Monster Vision. It was originally hosted by Penn and Teller, but eventually Joe Bob Briggs got hosting duties, and for a few sweet years, we were treated to not just the man's love of film and B films and everything that is just crazy and kooky and just out there in the genre, but he made that show something that was really special because he brought in all kinds of guests, experts in the field, movie stars, producers, people who worked in all manner of places in these films, and he gifted us with all this information about the movie, about what the movie was talking about. And despite a lot of the humor, Joe Bob is a man who knows and loves film, and that came through with the kind of questions that he asked. They had fun with it, but it felt educational. It felt like you were getting something out of it aside from just sound bites. And one of the movies that he showed there was Forbidden Planet, and when I heard that it was going to be shown, I flipped out. I set my VCR to record because I did not want to miss a thing, and I watched it when it premiered. It was on a night that they showed Mars Attacks as well. It was one of the summer episodes, and the theme that week was like UFOs or something like that. And he brought on Anne Francis, who stars in the movie, and they just had it was a wonderful time. It was wonderful seeing her reminisce about this movie so many decades after the fact. And the movie itself is considered kind of a staple, a classic of science fiction film. It was the first science fiction film that got big budget approval from a studio. There had been science fiction films and shows before. Tom Corbett, Flash Gordon, a lot of other smaller shows that I'm blanking on right now, but this was a movie that, amazingly enough, got a big film budget, and they used it, and it shows, because even though this was 1956, for the time, this was incredible. Like the visuals, the set design, the props, everything. You got actual legitimate, actors. You had Walter Pidgeon, Leslie Nielsen in his pre-comedy days when he was doing dramas. This was I think this was his first starring role. There's just so much about this movie that was revolutionary. The music, this was the first major production that used an entirely electronic soundtrack. They had Walt Disney Studios did the animation for some of the effects. The ship itself was, I think it was a 3/4 set piece, so that you could actually be in front of it. Remember, there's no computer imagery at this point. You want to have special effects, they either got to be practical or you got to do, stuff with superimposing film. Without Forbidden Planet, we would not have Star Trek, which premiered 10 years afterwards. We would not have had Star Wars, which was 21 years after the fact. But this movie is also a great example of something I talked about in the Masters of the Universe 2.5 video. It's a movie that's very much an early 1950s social sensibilities movie. You're going to see a lot of stuff that would be completely ordinary in 1956, but is going to look really, really awkward in 2021. And you'll see exactly what I mean. I'm going to point it out. I haven't sat down to watch the whole movie in a couple of years. And it is a favorite movie of mine. And despite everything that it did right, I think it's important to also look at movies like this and acknowledge where they fell short. And you'll see what I mean when we start watching the movie. In praising this movie, I don't want you to think that I'm praising those things I'll be pointing out, because even when, like I said in the Masters of the Universe video, even the original Star Trek, which I think was a wonderful way of exposing a lot of people to science fiction and to these kinds of worlds and writings and stories, it still did a lot of stuff that even at the time was considered not proper. So let's take a look at this movie. Let's enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it and kind of analyze it. Let's break down what works, what doesn't, and what we can learn from doing that with this movie and other movies and television shows. So I'm excited. I love this movie, warts and all. Let's get to it. Anybody who follows me on Facebook knows that I am a sucker for old science fiction visual style. Everything from the cassette punk of Alien and Aliens to what's called rocket punk, which this I think is an example of. Just listen to that soundtrack. This was the first major motion picture that had an all-electronic soundtrack. It's so atmospheric, too. It's just like this slow drone. I mean, it's...
In the final decade of the 21st century, men and women in rocket ships landed on the moon. By 2200 AD, they had reached...
That was pessimistic.
Our solar system.
I love these old science fiction shows that used to say things like, oh, in moon base in 1955 or something like that. And Forbidden Planet went the entirely opposite direction and got it wrong by 130 years. You can't go wrong with an analog system. I'll take one of these over a hologram screen any day.
DC fix. We'll reach DC point at 1701. That's less than 3 minutes now. All right.
Apparently they got the registry number for the Enterprise off of that, 1701. One of the things that this movie does is that it just shows us stuff and it explains it. And some of the explanations that they give sound a little nonsensical, but it keeps things consistent. I mean, there's rules to the technology and the stuff that they do. One of the things that gets established very early on is that they're a year away from Earth. So they can't just go get help. They're very much on their own. This is like if today we tried to go to Mars.
All right. We're down to point 3896 of light speed.
That's still really fast. It's like 100,000 kilometers a second.
Yeah.
Actually, it's more than that. Again, all of this is either hand-drawn or it's a model. The lack of music really just makes you focus on everything else going on. The acting, the action of, this. One thing you may have noticed is that the crew is very monochromatic.
you than Earth standard. Gravity only 0.897. Adjust your equipment accordingly, that is all.
All hands, check equipment.
I would think this is the kind of thing, given a year, they would have done before getting here, but, yeah, whatever. I mean, none of that really affects anything else that happens in the story, but it's just like little details like that for world-building purposes. All painted, all models. I mean, even if this does look cheesy or cheap by our standards, you have to see it from the point of view of like a 1956 audience. I mean, this was incredible. This was a big budget science fiction production. This had not happened before. And even though it does look a little bit kind of like a just like a filmed theater play, you know, this it's kind of what it was. I mean, these are all sets. All of this was filmed on a soundstage, excluding some of the special effects shots and things like that. I mean, they really are just acting on a set. I mean, a lot of these performers had theater experience. I mean, that was their background. Hence, a lot of the very bombastic acting. It seems over the top for us, but that is how a lot of them got their start, either that or radio. You know, that's the tradition that they're working with. So while the style of acting and everything else seems very old and quaint or cheesy, I really hate that word, by the way.
I don't know. I think it might
There's a reason for it.
Grow to love it. Wasn't.
Supposedly the sky's green, based on another story where there was an algae in the sky that created that color. They apparently did a lot of research too on what the vehicles, the weapons, everything would look like. Again, all based on early 1950s understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, a science fiction icon.
Welcome to Altair 4, gentlemen.
Doc, is it a male or female?
In my case, sir, the question is totally without meaning. Will you get in, gentlemen?
Yeah, Robbie's just out there living his best life. You do you. This movie, by the way, is based on, well, loosely based on Shakespeare's The Tempest, which kind of comes across in some of the dialogue, kind of, again, the theatricality of it.
There's a small built-in chemical laboratory where he analyzes it. Later he can reproduce identical molecules in
Housewife's dream.
plus absolute selfless obedience.
Women.
Fire. You understand the mechanism?
Yes, Morbius.
Walt Disney animated the stuff for this movie. Not Walt Disney himself, but like the Walt Disney
Now turn
Studios.
around here.
Yet this robot of yours is beyond the combined resources of all Earth's physical science.
My dear Commander, maybe you overestimate both Robbie and Mike.
The idea of, like, you know, 3D printers and things like that just didn't exist back then. And we have, I mean, we don't have Robbie yet, but we have something similar.
Alta,
Ladies and gentlemen, and Francis.
I asked you not to join.
Personal space, man. Come on.
Suppose one day I shall be obliged to make the trip to Earth with her for the sake of her natural development.
I should say fairly soon, too.
How? You don't have a ship.
Father was
Please note the color that they're using here. The crew of the cruiser are wearing gray. He's wearing black. She's wearing white. Clearly she's the more innocent one. He's the one that is, we don't know this yet, but kind of the, you know,
Human hearing. I often feel it myself.
not exactly corrupted, but just very much dogmatic, whereas they are somewhere in the middle. They are not quite there yet. Clearly they're military, but you know, they're still flexible in what they believe and are willing to do the right thing. I mean, Morbius thinks he's doing the right thing, as we find out later, but yeah.
What's up?
Look,
Also, that garden is apparently the set of Wizard of Oz. That's the Munchkin Village.
watch.
You can barely notice it, but it's actually a split screen they're using there. Anne Francis was never on set at the same time as the tiger. Okay, you could kind of see where the tiger faded out a little bit when it was close to her, but other than that, it's a pretty solid effect.
Circumstances.
Yes, you see, my orders don't quite seem to cover the Bellerophon fatality. Forced now to contact baseball instruction.
But, Commander,
You didn't know what happened to these people for 20 years. You didn't think that maybe part of what you should have planned for was casualties?
my work here. Tell me just. Look out there, Commander. Bellerophon party. 19 years ago, I dug those
I've always loved
graves with my own
that
hands.
shot, the
I have
graves in the
no
distance.
wish to repeat that experience.
Part of that's a set, part of that's a matte painting, and it's very difficult to see where one ends and one starts.
Sure.
Like I said, I mean, obviously a lot of the stuff they're doing here is science fiction, but they took a little bit of care to at least design things so that they'd be, if not realistic, at least consistent, which if you can't do one, go for the other.
Are these condensers out of my accelerator circuits?
Yes, sir. I borrowed some solenoid from your gyro stabilizers, too. But here's the big deal, sir. I'll bet any quantum mechanic in the service...
Apparently all those words actually mean something. I've never taken like a course in electronics, but they all apparently are real things. Now, whether they're being used correctly, I don't know, but they're at least making the attempt to ground this in something that at least some people in the audience might have understood. And it's that kind of research that really makes a science fiction work more believable, more relatable, easier to kind of fall into. If there's some basis in reality, if you can identify something.
I'm a stranger in this so-called planet. Mister, I've been from here to there in this galaxy, and I just want you to know you're the most understanding soul I ever met up with. Ow!
Nothing really personal. Just a kiss.
I know those scenes seem a little out of place, but I really do love Cookie.
It's an old custom. All of the really high civilizations...
Ah, yes, we're getting to the pseudo-rapey part of the
Good
plot.
for you, though. It stimulates the whole system. As a matter of fact, you can't be in tip...
I mean, what we're basically seeing here is sexual assault. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. That's what this scene is.
And you can depend on it, Lieutenant, that those privileges won't be stretched to taking your kind of advantages. Oh, polite dismiss.
Yeah, we're going to let you off with just a warning there, and now we're going to chew out the woman.
What'd you expect?
Yeah, see, this is what I was talking about how older works, despite their merits in some areas, should not be taken completely, put up on a pedestal. Put them on a pedestal for some things, but that scene right there is really uncomfortable to watch in 2021. It was uncomfortable to watch in 1999, okay?
How did the commander?
Funny to see two moons in the sky, isn't it?
Funny how
That-
quick a guy gets used to it.
That music in this scene. And the slow realization that it's not just a camera shot, you're actually seeing a POV shot.
Did you hear something? You heard breathing. And younger, let me see.
You may notice that there's no cameras or anything like that. The commander had a camera on this little doodad on his belt, but that's treated like it's like a very specialized piece of equipment. Like there's no actual cameras anywhere because they wouldn't think that
Oh, me too, sir?
you could afford something like that.
20 extra watches. I'll have less.
I mean, consider the fact that if you told somebody 30 years ago that everyone was going to be walking around with a computer in their pocket, that would have sounded pretty ridiculous too.
Quinn.
No real point to that scene, but I figured they had access to a monkey and they said, damn it, we're going to use that monkey.
Gentlemen.
And how do you get this past the censors in 1956? You show them that she's actually wearing a dress under there. It's just flesh colored.
Oh, murder.
Never mind. Coming out.
You can barely see it when she's underwater, but you can get a glimpse of it when she gets out. Yeah. Now, see, it's okay when he does it, but not when the other guy does it. You know, take advantage of the 19-year-old. I love that effect, actually, like just the smoke cloud in the shape of it. And
Recognize me.
Then the time has come for clarification. Sit down.
exposition time. This next sequence of him explaining pretty much the entirety of the movie's way backstory. Again, this was acceptable back in the day, but for us today, this would be a scene that would probably get cut or have a flashback sequence or something like that, because it's just talking, like it's just exposition. There's a lot of better ways to handle it today, or at least better by our standards. 50 years from now, we might have a new way of approaching it.
When in the course of no record of their physical nature has survived, except perhaps in the form of this characteristic arch. I suggest you consider it in comparison to one of our functionally designed human doorways.
This is probably one of the smartest thing that the writers and the production decided on. Never actually show us the Krell.
I'd like to descend that all the way to the top, which by Krell standards classifies me as a low-grade moron. Yet I have an officially recorded IQ of 183. Now then, for the primary...
IQ tests. The things we've kind of stopped paying attention to for very good reason.
I'll choose a familiar subject to start with to save time.
That's Altera.
Simply a three-dimensional image, Commander.
But it's alive.
Because my daughter is alive...
You cannot tell me George Lucas did not base the Princess Leia hologram on this scene right here. I mean, he has gone on record as saying that this was a huge influence in creating Star Wars.
Gentlemen, would you care to see some more of the Krell wonders?
Indeed, yes.
If you will.
Yeah, sure. Who needs plot? I'm kidding. I mean, again, this was the style at the time. And a lot of it really is just to show off the visuals and the set design and all these different things. I mean, it's to wow the audience.
What now, Dr. Morbius?
Prepare your minds for a new scale of physical scientific values, gentlemen.
This right here must have blown some minds. Babylon 5 fans, you may see that this is pretty much the design of the Great Machine as well.
You can feel the warm air rising. Look down here. Look down, gentlemen. Are you afraid?
Yeah, I'd rather not. Yeah, there's no railing. OSHA would like to have a word with you. Even now, even though this is all older effects, just the fact that somebody had to figure out how to do this, how to composite these images, somebody had to draw these things and make them look as photorealistic as possible, given the time allowed. It's still amazing just to watch it.
For 2,000...
Have you tested it yet, Bosun? Right away, sir. There you are, sir. Very good.
It's a lot more fluid than some of the stuff that came after it, which I'm perfectly fine with.
What's up? Somebody coming this way?
No, sir. Nothing coming this way.
He's not lying. It's not coming towards them. Here we go. Did you see it?
Shall I shut down the current, sir?
I remember one of the first things when I really started watching film that was really intriguing to me was Invisible Man effects like this. Like, how do you make it look like something's there when there really isn't anything there? And a lot of the stuff is really simple. Just kind of like set it up so that part of the floor drops where you want it to make the footprint.
Skipper, the chief's been murdered.
Quinn murdered?
Yes, he was alone, working on the monitor. The rest of us were all outside on guard duty.
How was it done?
Done. Skipper, his body is plastered all over the communications room.
All right, leave everything as it is. We're on our way.
That's a horrifying line in any movie, but in a movie from 1956, the image that must have popped into people's heads. I mean, this movie went from science fiction mystery to science fiction horror, and it's gonna kind of stay there, actually.
You were with the robot last night?
Yes. Well, maybe we kind of got to toasting each other's good health. Just for cordial interplanetary relations, you understand?
Now, that's all the time. Even while the chief was being killed.
Certainly, sir. I hope you don't think I could have got that stiff in 5 minutes.
While completely out of line, he raises an excellent point. How do you build a cannon that basically shoots neutrons? Put a giant lead plate in front of the barrel.
Check good.
Note how it's gotten a lot darker visually as well. Like, it's not as bright. The shadows are a lot deeper.
It's sort of edgy to see whatever's out there. Oh, Jerry.
Yeah, they should be. This is a legitimately tense scene because you don't know what this thing even is. I mean, Jaws didn't show you the shark right away for a very good reason. Same thing. Not quite, and this is, I think, one of the smartest things they could have done here. I mean, this, you can only really see this thing from the light of the blasts and like the static charge and all these things. It is demonic, supernatural looking, and it is a complete curveball. It's not a guy in a suit. It's not a puppet. Yeah. And I don't know what these two idiots were thinking. But picking them up like that and throwing them around, and it just, yeah. Got the eye for detail that the animators had to do something like that, and the slow fade away. I love it. Love it, love it, love it.
Altura!
Really nice touch on production to also make sure that the gauges were up and running while he was dreaming. So somebody observant enough could have probably figured it out by now. Some years back, I remember there was talk of a remake, and I believe it was Anthony Hopkins who was in talks to play Morbius. That fell through. I remember Harlan Ellison was talking about... I could be wrong on this part here, but I vaguely recall reading something about Harlan Ellison talking about doing a sequel to this, because I think it was something like he said there was no way that this was the only planet with Krell artifacts. So I would love to see a sequel to this film set, 60, 70 years later, where somebody else comes across some Krell artifacts, different ones though, like something else. Part of what makes this movie really stand out is something that
I am monitored with no one at this hour.
oh my God, one of the actors, I forget who it was asked why this movie was such a hit with audiences and critics, and the response was basically from day one they told us take it seriously, which is the same approach that Christopher Nolan took to the Batman movies. It's kind of what Marvel's been doing with the MCU movies, some of them anyway. Winter Soldier, for example, it's probably the most serious one. It's still a pretty it's still a comic book movie. This movie takes itself seriously, but not too seriously. It's in that sweet spot where it has the charisma. You know, it's like they say, you know, like if you're going to do public speaking, you got to have charisma. This movie's got the charisma and the attitude kind of moving forward, and it just kind of takes you along with it. It's still, you know, aliens and alien planets and monsters and a robot and all these wonderful 1950s science fiction tropes, but it just kind of pulls you along.
What's loose on this planet?
But I'm immune, like both my parents.
That's what he says. I don't believe it. Nothing could be immune to that thing.
Darling, please go.
Yeah, remember that tiger that tried to eat you?
The fool, the meddling idiot, as though his ape's brain could contain the secrets of the Krell.
He's dead.
He was warned, and now he's paid. Let him be buried with the other victims of human greed and folly.
Morbius, you wanted me to make a choice.
Ooh.
Chosen poor.
Like you, the Krell forgot one deadly danger. Their own subconscious hate and lust for destruction.
The beast, the mindless primitive. Even the Krell must have evolved from that beginning.
And so those mindless beasts of the subconscious had access to a machine that could never be shut down. The secret devil of every soul on the planet, all set free at once to loot and maim. And take revenge, Morbius, and kill.
Basically a planetary level purge.
They are purging the out of each other. Oh my God. Oh. That was... Okay, yeah, that was gross.
Morbius.
One of the things I love about this movie is that it doesn't place humanity on this pedestal of like, we are awesome, and it doesn't place the Krell on the same pedestal either. I mean, both species are, as this is showing, very flawed. The music too also really puts a lot on the actors and the actress here to sell the emotions in the scene. I mean, the music's just almost background noise. I mean, this really is as close to like a theater production as I've seen in a movie. That had to have been superimposed, right? There's no way they'd have that on set. Yeah. Bittersweet ending. Not a triumphant crescendo, just kind of a lot of death, and there are things man was not meant to know. Yeah. All right, let's talk about it. This movie is a classic for a reason. Like I pointed out several times, there's no getting away from the fact that a lot of the attitudes and a lot of the characterization, a lot of the conflict in this movie are things that we would off the bat say, what are you doing? This is not a... I mean, there's blatant sexual assault that's treated as, oh, you know, don't do that. Now let me go turn around and blame the woman who literally has no idea what's going on. A lot of the language that gets used as well is not the kind of language that would get used now. The cast, like I said, nothing but white guys and one white woman. I had a professor who used to joke, the history of science as taught in school is the history of a bunch of dead white guys and one dead white woman. So clearly, were this something that was going to be made or remade today, a lot of those things would be addressed. So characters would be a lot different. The casting would certainly be a lot more different as well. The main theme, I think, there are things that we're not ready for yet would probably still resonate. There's a very cosmic horror, kind of Lovecraftian thing going on here about, these ancient beings and their fall from grace. A little bit of At the Mountains of Madness in that regard. But like I said, and I'm not going to go too much into it because I already talked for like 10 minutes in the introduction, this movie paved the way for so many things. It rightfully deserves to be remembered for its triumphs, but it also needs to be remembered for the things where it fell short. And we have to be honest about that when it comes to, nostalgia. I have very fond memories of watching this movie. And the first time watching Joe Bob Briggs interviewing Anne Francis, and just that love for the genre and what this movie meant for so many people, while simultaneously keeping in mind that it's from a place and a time that we've moved on in a lot of ways. So that's my take on this movie. If you've never seen the full version, I very much encourage you to find a copy. And look at it, flaws and all. It's the most honest way we can look at the things that have shaped us. So thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and hit subscribe, hit that notification button, Patreon, sign up, help the channel grow. And I don't know, the goal at some point, this could be my full-time job. Little film studies, a little literary analysis going on here. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.